My son-in-law kicked me out, but he panicked when the bank revealed my secret. True story. Have you ever felt like you were slowly disappearing, piece by painful piece, in your own home, among the very people you loved most? Have you ever felt like you were slowly disappearing, piece by painful piece, in your own home, among the very people you loved most? Have you ever felt like you were slowly disappearing, piece by painful piece, in your own home, among the very people you loved most? Have you ever poured your entire being into raising a child, only to watch them, with your own two eyes, choose a stranger over you? To see them stand by, silent and complicit, as that stranger dismantles your very existence, piece by painstaking piece? I have. Oh, I have. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly fathom, was that the story they thought they were writing for me. I was holding the pen to the final chapter. And it wasn't going to be the one they expected. Not by a long shot. The morning air was crisp, biting at my exposed skin, but my heart was a block of ice, colder than any winter chill. It was a Tuesday, a day that should have been ordinary, filled with the comforting hum of domesticity. Instead, it became the day my world, as I knew it, was systematically, cruelly, and publicly dismantled. My home, this house I had poured my life into, the one Thomas and I had built together from the ground up, brick by loving brick, was being taken from me. I remembered standing here decades ago, sketching out garden plans, imagining Lyra's laughter echoing through these halls. Now, the only sound was the chilling echo of Cale's voice. My son-in-law stood on the front porch of my house, the house I had bought with my late husband, the house where I had raised my beautiful daughter, Lyra, his arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. His eyes, usually a cold blue, were glinting with a malicious satisfaction that made my stomach churn. "Well, Elara," he began, his voice dripping with saccharine condescension, loud enough for Mrs. Henderson next door, who was watering her prize-winning hydrangeas, to hear, loud enough for anyone passing by to catch snippets of my humiliation. "It seems your extended stay has, shall we say, expired. The property needs to be clear by noon. We have, plans for it. Plans that don't include an extra resident who contributes, well, nothing, really." He gestured vaguely at the overflowing boxes on the lawn, boxes filled with my life. My photo albums, bursting with memories of a happier time, of Thomas's booming laugh and Lyra's bright, curious eyes. My grandmother's antique quilt, carefully folded, a tangible link to generations of strong women. The chipped ceramic mug I used for my morning tea, a small comfort in a world that had become increasingly hostile. Each item, now exiled to the unforgiving grass, felt like a deliberate stab. It wasn't just my belongings, it was my identity, my history, being cast out like refuse. The carefully tended roses Thomas had planted along the porch seemed to droop in silent protest, their petals wilting under the weight of this public disgrace. My breath caught in my throat. "Cale, please," I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper, thick with disbelief. The words tasted like ash. "Where am I supposed to go? This is my home. I built this home. My husband and I bled for this home." The memory of Thomas, his strong hands, his quiet determination, flashed before my eyes, making the injustice even more unbearable. He chuckled, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor, like stones grinding together. "Your home. Oh, Elara, how quaint. It's Lyra's and my home now. And as for where you go, that's really not my concern, is it? Plenty of senior living facilities out there, I hear. Places where you'll be properly cared for, without, being a drain on other people's resources." He emphasized drain with a sneer, his eyes raking over me, judging my age, my perceived frailty. "Honestly, at your age, what exactly do you contribute, besides a perpetual sigh and a penchant for leaving lights on?" His words were a physical blow, stripping away not just my home, but my sense of worth, my purpose. A hot flush spread across my face, not from shame, but from a burgeoning, furious indignation. How dare he? How dare this man, who had waltzed into my daughter's life and slowly, methodically, poisoned it, speak to me with such contempt. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding back the surge of rage, of keeping my voice from rising to a furious shout that would only amuse him further. I wanted to lash out, to scratch that sneer off his face, but a lifetime of quiet dignity held me in check. And Lyra? My sweet Lyra? She stood in the doorway, just behind Cale, her face pale, her eyes cast down. Her shoulders were hunched, as if trying to shrink herself into oblivion. She was clutching a worn teddy bear, one I'd given her when she was a toddler, a soft, well-loved companion through countless childhood nights. Its tattered fur and missing eye were testaments to a time when she'd clung to me, sought my comfort. It was a silent plea, a desperate cry I could almost hear, but her lips remained sealed. She said nothing. Not a word in my defense. Not a single protest against the cruelty being inflicted upon her own mother. The silence from her was louder, more deafening, more agonizing than any of Cale's cutting remarks. It was a betrayal so profound it ripped through me, leaving a gaping, bleeding wound. My heart didn't just break, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. This was the final, unforgivable act. This was the moment the earth shifted beneath my feet, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that things could never, ever be the same. The line had been crossed, scorched and burned into the ground, and there was no turning back. They had pushed me, truly, truly pushed me, past any point of return. And you think this was the first time? Oh, if only. If only that Tuesday morning, with my life splayed out on the lawn like discarded rubbish, had been an isolated incident. If only it had been a sudden, shocking act of cruelty, rather than the culmination of years, of insidious, soul-crushing disrespect. No, this wasn't an abrupt storm, it was the inevitable hurricane after a decade of steadily rising tides of dismissiveness, veiled insults, and outright emotional manipulation. Cale came into our lives like a charming serpent, all smooth words and deceptive smiles. He had met Lyra at a corporate networking event, and she had been utterly smitten. I remembered Lyra excitedly telling me about his ambition, his intelligence, his supposed kindness. At first, I had tried to be open, to welcome him. I wanted Lyra to be happy. But there was always a glint in his eye, a subtle edge to his compliments, that set my teeth on edge. Lyra, my bright, spirited Lyra, was swept off her feet. I saw it, even then, the way he subtly started to isolate her, to subtly undermine her confidence, to subtly make her feel like his opinions, his desires, were the only ones that truly mattered. He would subtly criticize her choices, her friends, her hobbies, all under the guise of helping her improve. Lyra, darling, do you really need to spend another evening with those gossips? Your time is so valuable. We could be discussing our future, planning our investments. He'd say it with a loving smile, and Lyra, eager for his approval, would slowly pull away from her old life. At first, it was small things. Oh, Lyra, your mother means well, but she just doesn't understand modern finance. Or, Mom, don't you think that dress is a bit loud for you? Cale prefers you in more muted tones, don't you, love? Always with a saccharine smile, a pat on the arm, a gesture that made it seem like he was doing me a favor by pointing out my supposed flaws. He even once helped me carry groceries, only to subtly rearrange them in the fridge, remarking, Elara, you really must learn better organization. Wasteful otherwise. Soon, I wasn't Elara, the matriarch, the mother who had devoted her life to her family. I was the elder. Then, the old one. And eventually, I overheard Cale, in hushed tones to Lyra, referring to me as, the live-in help. The live-in help. In my own home. A home I had paid for with my husband's hard-earned money, a home into which I had poured my dreams and my sweat, painting walls, tending the garden, making it a sanctuary. Every creak of the floorboards, every sunbeam through the kitchen window, held a memory of Thomas and our shared life. And now, I was merely a shadow within it. I remember one particularly humiliating Christmas dinner. We were all gathered around the table, the scent of roast turkey filling the air, a scent that used to evoke pure joy. I had spent days preparing the meal, meticulously following my mother's recipes, trying to make it perfect, hoping to coax a flicker of the old Lyra back. Cale took a bite of my famous gravy, then grimaced dramatically, pushing his plate away slightly. "Elara," he said, loud enough for Lyra's Aunt Susan and Uncle George to hear, "are you sure you used fresh herbs? This tastes, well, it tastes like despair. And certainly not like any gravy my mother used to make. Hers was rich, complex, like a symphony." He winked at Lyra, who offered a weak, nervous giggle. My daughter, my brave, opinionated girl, who once would have leaped to my defense against any slight, now sat silently, her eyes fixed on her plate, as if willing herself to disappear. Aunt Susan gave me a sympathetic, knowing glance, but Cale's presence seemed to stifle any attempt at intervention. Another time, Lyra had a particularly stressful week at work. I, naturally, wanted to help. I offered to clean the house, do the laundry, prepare some meals. Cale overheard me. He stepped in, placing a hand on Lyra's shoulder, a possessive gesture. "Oh, Elara, darling, that's so sweet of you," he purred, his voice dripping with false concern. "But Lyra needs to learn to manage her own life. We can't have her relying on you for every little thing, can we? Besides, you're not getting any younger. We wouldn't want you to strain yourself." He then turned to Lyra and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I'll hire a cleaning service. A professional one." The implication was clear, I was not professional, I was a burden, and my efforts were unwanted. My attempts to contribute, to show my love, were systematically rejected, leaving me feeling increasingly useless and redundant. He started managing Lyra's finances, too, or so he claimed. He'd insist on knowing every detail of her salary, her savings, her inheritance from Thomas. He convinced her it was for their future, for optimizing their wealth. And then, he'd advise her on how much she should contribute to the household expenses, which, coincidentally, always seemed to increase just after I had received my small pension payment. He'd often forget his wallet when we went to the grocery store, or sigh dramatically about how expensive utilities were, looking pointedly at me. I found myself subtly subsidizing their lavish lifestyle, paying for groceries, utility bills, even Lyra's new clothes, under the guise of helping out. He had a way of making me feel guilty if I didn't offer, a way of implying I was stingy or unsupportive if I dared to question a single expense. My pension, which was meant to provide for my golden years, was slowly siphoned away, leaving me with little to spare for myself. Lyra, my intelligent, once independent daughter, slowly but surely transformed. Cale had chipped away at her confidence, convinced her that her judgment was flawed, that her opinions were secondary to his. She stopped making eye contact with me, stopped confiding in me. The easy laughter we once shared vanished. She became withdrawn, anxious, a shadow of her former self. It was as if Cale had a remote control for her, subtly manipulating her every move, her every word, turning her into a puppet, dancing to his tune. My heart ached for her, but every attempt I made to talk to her, to warn her, was met with Cale's swift, cutting intervention, or Lyra's own defensive retreat. "Mom, you just don't understand Cale," she'd say, her voice hollow, her eyes darting nervously towards the door, as if expecting Cale to appear. "He's just trying to protect me." "You're being old-fashioned." Protect her from what? From her own mother? From her own mind? The thought was unbearable. I became a ghost in my own home, a silent observer of my own slow erasure. I cooked, I cleaned, I tidied, hoping against hope that my continued presence and efforts would somehow pierce through Lyra's delusion. I listened to Cale's endless pronouncements, his grandiose plans for wealth and success, his thinly veiled criticisms of my every move. I endured his condescending pats on the head, his dismissive waves of the hand. I endured Lyra's complicit silence, which was, in its own way, far more painful than Cale's direct attacks. Each day was a tightening coil, a knot of resentment and sorrow growing in my chest. I tried to talk to Lyra, countless times. I would sit her down, try to appeal to the strong, independent woman I knew she still was, deep down. Lyra, my love, are you truly happy? Are you really alright with how Cale speaks to me, to us? She would just stare at me, her eyes clouded with a mixture of fear and resignation. Mom, she'd whisper, it's just Cale's way. He doesn't mean anything by it. You just need to adjust. Adjust? To being a doormat in my own home? To being erased from my own life? Never. Not me. Not Alara. They thought I had nothing. They thought I was a burden, a relic, a fading memory of a woman who had once held power and purpose. They saw an elderly woman, dependent and disposable, someone whose assets were negligible, whose contributions were non-existent. Oh, if only they knew. If only they knew about the final secret my clever, foresightful husband, Thomas, had ensured for me. Thomas, bless his pragmatic soul, had always been a man who prepared for every eventuality. He'd seen how families could turn on each other, how money could corrupt, how even the closest bonds could fray under pressure. He'd always joked about being overly cautious, but it was that very caution that saved me. Years ago, before his passing, when we decided to transfer the family home into Lyra's name, a gesture of love, a way to secure her future, or so we thought, Thomas had insisted on a safety net. A very particular kind of safety net. He called it Ilara's folly, but it was anything but foolish. He was a meticulous man, a former corporate lawyer who had seen too many probate battles and family feuds over property. He knew the dark side of human nature, even within families. It was a reversionary trust. Now, I'm no lawyer, and the legal jargon was always a bit beyond me, but Thomas had explained it in simple terms, terms I understood perfectly. He'd said, Ilara, my love, this house, this property, it's always going to be your sanctuary. Your place. No one, absolutely no one, will ever be able to take it from you, or make you feel unwelcome here, without facing consequences. It's my final promise to you, that you will always have a roof over your head, a place to call truly your own. The trust was established with a specific, ironclad clause tied directly to the property's deed. It ensured my lifetime right to residency, an undeniable, primary claim on the property's value, should I ever be forcibly removed from the home, or if Lyra or Cale attempted to sell or refinance it without my explicit, written consent. Thomas had set it up so cleverly, embedding it deep within the legal framework, making it virtually invisible unless someone went looking for it with a fine-toothed comb. He'd chosen a specific type of trust, one that would quietly lie dormant, a sleeping dragon, until certain conditions were met. Conditions like me being thrown out onto the street. Conditions like Cale trying to leverage my equity for his reckless schemes. He even had a lawyer friend, a brilliant but discreet woman named Ms. Davies, oversee its creation, ensuring it was airtight. For years, it had remained dormant. A comforting, silent reassurance in the back of my mind. I never thought I'd actually need it. I truly believed Lyra would never let things get to this point. I held on to the hope that the daughter I raised would never participate in such cruelty. But that Tuesday morning, as I watched my life being tossed onto the lawn like so much garbage, as I saw the cold, contemptuous triumph in Cale's eyes, and the gut-wrenching, complicit silence in Lyra's, something inside me snapped. The despair that had settled over me for so long burned away, replaced by a fierce, incandescent resolve. The image of Thomas's face, his unwavering love for me, became a burning ember in my heart. I sat there on that park bench, the cold seeping into my bones, clutching the one photo album I had managed to snatch before the eviction crew, indifferent strangers hired by Cale, started piling my things into a rental truck. I flipped through pages of smiling faces, Thomas, Lyra as a baby, our first Christmas in this very house, surrounded by boxes, yet filled with hope. Each image was a testament to a life I had built, a life they were trying to erase. And then, I saw a picture of Thomas, standing proudly in front of the house, a faint, proud smile on his face, his arm around my shoulder. In that moment, it wasn't just a photograph, it was a sign. His voice echoed in my mind, clear as a bell, "Your sanctuary, Elara. Always." The decision wasn't made in a sudden flash of anger. It was a slow, deliberate crystallization of intent, forged in the fires of betrayal. It was the culmination of years of quiet suffering, of biting my tongue, of swallowing my pride, of hoping, always hoping, that Lyra would see sense, that Cale would somehow change. But he hadn't. And she hadn't. They had gone too far. They had taken my home, my dignity, and worst of all, they had shattered my faith in the bond with my own child. The wound Lyra inflicted with her silence was deeper than any Cale could have made. There was no going back. The rules had changed. Their cruelty had unlocked something in me, something I hadn't known was still there, a steely resilience, a formidable will. The reversionary trust was not just a legal document, it was Thomas's last, enduring act of love, a sword and shield he had forged for me. And now, the time had come to wield it. I would not just reclaim my home, I would reclaim my life, my peace, and in doing so, I would deliver a lesson they would never, ever forget. I would show them that the bold woman they dismissed as worthless was, in fact, the one who held the ultimate power. The dragon was awake. And then, the day came. The day everything would be laid bare. It wasn't a dramatic family dinner, no grand announcement from me. Oh no, that would have been far too convenient for them, a chance for Cale to spin a new web of lies. This was far more delicious, far more poetic. This was a silent, legal reckoning, orchestrated by the very forces Cale believed he could manipulate for his own gain. Cale, in his infinite arrogance and insatiable greed, had decided to embark on a new business venture. It was, from what I gathered through hushed phone calls Lyra made to a concerned aunt, something incredibly risky, requiring a substantial amount of capital. A convoluted scheme involving cryptocurrency and offshore investments, as vague and grandiose as all his other brilliant ideas. And where did he plan to get this capital? By refinancing my house, of course. The house he believed was entirely his and Lyra's, free and clear, a golden goose waiting to be plucked. He saw it as a simple transaction, borrow against the equity, fund his risky scheme, and then, he probably imagined, make millions and further solidify his control, perhaps even buy Lyra a diamond bigger than her head. I had been staying with my sister, Clara, a woman of fierce loyalty and even fiercer opinions, in a small, quiet apartment a few towns over. Clara had welcomed me with open arms, but also with a stern gaze that said, "I told you so." We spent evenings sipping tea, Clara listening patiently as I recounted the years of slights, her hand often squeezing mine in comfort. I was trying to rebuild my life, piece by painful piece, navigating the bureaucracy of finding a new, permanent place, a place where I wouldn't be a burden, a place where I could breathe again. The ache of betrayal, the ghost of my old home, lingered, a constant phantom limb. The world felt like a vast, cold ocean, and I was adrift. But even then, even in my lowest moments, the knowledge of the trust, the dormant dragon, hummed beneath the surface of my consciousness, a quiet promise of justice. I wondered constantly when, and how, it would finally awaken. Clara, ever the pragmatist, had reminded me, "Elara, Thomas knew what he was doing. Just wait. Their greed will be their undoing." The call came not to me, but to Cale. And I learned about it through the grapevine, a wonderfully efficient network of family friends and a certain very chatty bank teller named Brenda, who happened to be Clara's bridge partner. Brenda was a fount of local information, her eyes always twinkling with a juicy secret. The bank, a rather large, reputable institution, was, naturally, doing its due diligence for Cale's refinancing application. They needed a thorough title search, a deep dive into the property's history, to assess the collateral and ensure there were no hidden encumbrances. This was standard procedure, a routine step for Cale. A step he probably dismissed as a formality, an unnecessary bureaucratic hurdle. But it was in that routine formality that the sleeping dragon stirred. The title search, meticulous and exhaustive, didn't just find the standard records. It dug deeper, unearthing the complex, carefully worded legal instrument Thomas had put in place years ago. The reversionary trust. The clause tied to the deed. My undeniable lifetime right to residency. My significant claim on the property's value should I be forcibly removed or if they attempted to sell or refinance without my explicit consent. It was all there, clear as day, a primary claim that superseded any claim Cale or Lyra had. My consent. Which, of course, they didn't have. And wouldn't get. I didn't witness Cale's reaction firsthand, but the whispers from Brenda, the bank teller, painted a vivid picture. She described how he'd received a call from the bank's legal department, informing him, politely but firmly, that his refinancing application had hit a rather insurmountable snag. He'd apparently scoffed, demanding to know what nonsense this was, threatening to take his business elsewhere. That's when they explained it to him. The trust. Ilara's primary claim. The fact that, legally, I still held an undeniable interest in the property. And that his attempt to refinance, without my express, written approval, which, as they subtly pointed out, was impossible given the circumstances of my eviction, actually triggered the reversionary clause. The house, in essence, was reverting to my control. Or, at the very least, my claim was now indisputable, making any transaction by him impossible without my participation. And I wasn't participating. Not in his schemes. Brenda said Cale's voice had gone from arrogant bluster to a strangled, panicked whisper. What? Revert? What are you talking about? She has nothing. She's just an old woman. He tried to argue, to intimidate, but the bank's lawyers were impassive. The documents were ironclad. The trust was irrefutable. His entire financial scheme, built on the presumed liquid asset of my home, collapsed in an instant, like a house of cards. The house was not his to leverage. It was not his to sell. It was, effectively, mine again. His business venture, the one that was supposed to make him a millionaire, evaporated into thin air. He was trapped, not just unable to refinance, but potentially facing legal action if he continued to deny my rights. Brenda said he hung up the phone with a defeated slump, his face white, his arrogance utterly shattered. Later that day, Lyra called Clara. Not me. She was sobbing, hysterical. Clara put her on speakerphone so I could hear. Mom, oh my God, Mom, what did you do? Lyra wailed, her voice raw with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. Cale. Cale is losing everything. The bank, they said the house isn't ours anymore. They said you still own it somehow. What is this? Her words were a torrent of panic, not remorse. Not yet. But I could hear the cracks in Cale's carefully constructed facade, the fear finally piercing through Lyra's long-standing delusion. My heart didn't leap with cruel joy, but settled into a quiet, profound sense of vindication. The silence I had endured for so long was finally broken, replaced by the chaotic symphony of their undoing. The look on Cale's face, I imagined, must have been a masterpiece of horror, a mirror image of the despair he had tried to inflict upon me. And Lyra? I pictured her face, not yet filled with regret for her complicity, but with the terrifying realization that her safe, complacent world, built on Cale's lies and my silent suffering, was crumbling before her eyes. So, where is Cale now, you ask? The man who prided himself on his sharp mind and even sharper tongue. The man who called me the live-in help and a drain. Well, his grand business venture, the one that was supposed to make him a tycoon, went belly up before it even truly began. Without the house as collateral, no bank would touch him. His other investments, which I later learned were always far riskier than he let on, quickly followed suit. They were built on speculation and hubris, not substance. He spiraled into debt, his arrogance turning into a desperate, snarling defensiveness, lashing out at anyone and everyone. He lost his job, his reputation, and eventually, the last shred of Lyra's respect. The man who had cultivated an image of success was revealed to be nothing more than a charlatan. Lyra, my daughter, finally saw him for what he was. Not a protector, not a brilliant strategist, but a manipulative, cruel, and ultimately, incompetent man who had not only destroyed my peace but was now destroying their own future. The scales fell from her eyes, but the price of that realization was steep. She had stood by silently as I was humiliated, as I was stripped of my dignity. And now, she was left with the bitter taste of his failure, his ruin, and the crushing weight of her own complicity. The fear that had kept her silent for so long was replaced by a cold, hard anger at Cale, and, I hoped, a burgeoning shame for her own actions. Their marriage, as you might imagine, didn't survive the financial collapse and the stark unveiling of Cale's true character. The constant recriminations, the desperate blame game, the shattered dreams, it was too much. They separated, and Lyra, humbled and heartbroken, eventually moved back in with Clara for a while, too ashamed to face me directly. She sent me a long, rambling letter, filled with apologies and explanations, none of which truly excused her silence, but at least, finally, acknowledging the immense pain she had caused. She wrote of her fear, of Cale's subtle threats, of how he had eroded her self-worth until she couldn't imagine a life without him. It was a start, a very late, very painful start, but a start nonetheless. I haven't seen her yet, but perhaps, one day, we can begin to mend the shattered fragments of our relationship. And me? I sit here, in my home. The house is quiet now, filled with the gentle hum of peace. The echoes of Cale's sneers and Lyra's silence have faded, replaced by the comforting sounds of my own breathing, the ticking of the old grandfather clock Thomas loved. I've rearranged the furniture, painted the walls a soft, calming blue, a color that reminds me of clear skies and open possibilities. My grandmother's quilt is draped over my favorite armchair, a tangible link to my strength and heritage, and my chipped ceramic mug sits proudly on the kitchen counter, filled with hot tea. I wake up each morning, no longer with a knot of dread in my stomach, but with a quiet sense of triumph. I reclaimed what was mine, not just the physical bricks and mortar, but my dignity, my autonomy, my very self. The lesson they learned was harsh, unequivocal. Never, ever underestimate someone you deem weak or insignificant. Never mistake patience for weakness, or kindness for foolishness. And never, ever, test anyone's patience to its absolute limits, because when the quiet ones finally decide to act, the reckoning they bring is often the most profound, the most surprising, and the most utterly devastating. My quiet patience, my silent endurance, was not a sign of surrender. It was the calm before the storm. And they, in their arrogance, walked right into it. Are there any other mothers out there who have forgotten themselves for the sake of their children's happiness, only to find themselves cast aside? Have you, too, felt that agonizing pull between wanting to protect your child and wanting to stand up for yourself? I know my story is just one of many, a testament to the quiet strength that often lies hidden within us, waiting for the moment to emerge. My channel has many similar stories of life lessons, of resilience, and of finding your voice when you thought it was lost forever. If you resonated with my story, if you felt a flicker of recognition or understanding, please consider subscribing to my channel. Turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of the powerful narratives we share. And most importantly, share your own troubles, your own thoughts, your own moments of quiet defiance in the comments below. Let's create a community where our voices are heard, and our experiences are validated. Thank you for listening.